Well, Hillary, welcome to God-Sized Stories. It's such a pleasure to meet you and to have you on my show.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Well, wonderful. I love your sign on the back.
Oh, thank you.
And I absolutely love the mama bear concept because I am a mama bear. So,
hmm
my kids are older now, but, I think that once a mama bear, always a mama bear.
Yes, indeed. I fully agree.
Well, I'm very excited about talking about this project and about really your ministry because this is your second book, right? On the
hmm
Mama Bear. The first one was Mama Bear. It was just help.
Mama Bear Apologetics, Empowering Your Kids to Challenge Cultural Lies was the first book. And then our second book, Mama Bear Apologetics, Guide to Sexuality, Empowering Your Kids to Understand and Live Out God's Design.
And I actually have a copy of it, which I've been reviewing. It is it's rich. It's like not it's a great read, easy to read, but at the same time very dense, like with
Yes.
content, with research. It's wonderful.
Yep,
Well,
we had to get a lot of information, and it was, like I think chapter 5 or 6, it started out as 60 pages, and we just had to keep summarizing, condense, summarizing, condense. So there's a lot of information packed in there.
yes, absolutely. Well, I wanted to ask you, first of all, tell us a little bit about just your ministry, how it
Mhm.
all started.
Yeah, so Mama Bear Apologetics started many years ago when I met this one woman, Jody Weiss, who was at my parents' church, and my husband and I had been asked to come in and sit in on this apologetics class just kind of to help out. And she was telling her story about how she raised her kids in the faith, and they did a wanted. One of them rededicated his life in college, and they were youth group leaders. And then out of college, one of them, I think it's her youngest, his boss said something like, Jesus is basically Santa Claus for adults. And for some reason that stuck with him and he walked away from the faith. I mean, I'm sure it was more than that, but that was like what he kind of said was like a trigger to make him start questioning a bunch of stuff. And so she did what she would not normally do, which she started studying philosophy. She started studying apologetics. She kept saying, every single time you have a question, bring it back to me and let's talk about it and I'll research it. And this was not something she ever felt the need for her own faith. But I think Mama Bears, what we do is we will rise up and do whatever it takes when we see that our child is in danger. So when she was kind of sharing that story, I was like, that's an instinct that we need to capitalize on. What is that? I thought that's a mama bear right there.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I just had the phrase Mama Bear Apologetics going through my head. And then I was kind of told by a friend of mine that there's a large demographic out there of women who will not read something unless it's by women for women, which being raised as a total daddy's girl and being in the sciences and sometimes being the only woman in the room, I was like, really? I did not know about this. And so my mind went from who's discipling the women in this to, oh my gosh, who's discipling the moms? Because the moms are the ones who get all the questions. Tell me if you've ever had this scene in your house. Your husband's sitting on the couch, drinking coffee, watching TV, and the child will walk right past dad and go straight into the bathroom where mom's taking a bath and shaving her legs to ask her the question, like to get, the pickle jar open or something like that. It's like he could have very easily gone to dad, but mom is the one who has all the answers.
Yes.
And so I thought, if mom's the one having all the answers, like that is our, kind of our ground zero right there in the home in terms of questions, where they're going for spiritual questions. Now, that is not to say that dad is not important. In fact, there's research that shows that a warm relationship with the father actually, all the impact that mom has, it's actually the relationship with the father
Absolutely.
that will determine, not will determine, but is more correlated with passing on the faith. So having that relationship with dad is super important and correlates to being able to pass the faith along from generation to generation. But in terms of asking the questions, just kids, they go to mom first. So that is who I have this burning desire to equip. And I felt like the Lord had called the wrong person and I was supposed to commission someone else to do this. I was like, okay, who is it, Lord? Who am I supposed to go lay hands on and commission? Because we don't have kids, and because of health, I can't have kids and I can't adopt because of health reasons.
Oh,
And so I kind of felt the Lord say, no, this is for you because you have something that moms don't have, which is time to research.
wow,
And
that's incredible. What a gift,
yeah, and
right? I
so
mean,
this is my motherhood, is being able to equip other women to be able to synthesize these ideas for their kids.
and apologetics, I mean, of course, anybody can study to a certain degree apologetics, but it takes so much time, right? For you to, I mean, most people, if you really want to get into it, it really should go into a degree, a master's in apologetics or something, because it's just a lot of research,
Mm-hmm.
culture and Bible, right? And then and that's something, like you said, that a lot of times the mamas who are busy, um, like you said, opening the jar because
They're
the kid
trying to keep
didn't
the
ask
little
for
people
daddy.
alive. They're
We're
trying like,
just keeping them, exactly.
yeah.
It's very true that they don't have the time. So I
Mm-hmm.
love that you research, you summarize things in a very, very well done way. And I know that you also have a co-author, Amy Davison, who she has a apologetics degree, right, from
Mm-hmm.
Southern Baptist Theological
She does.
Seminary,
Mm-hmm.
and she has a heart also, just right straight into apologetics and into
Yep.
sexuality, and uh, just read it, all this craziness that's going around. This is a book uh, for such a time as this. Absolutely. I read some things about your research, and I've had the privilege in this past year, last year, to interview George Barna, who, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that you utilize a lot of
Yep.
his research, and Jeff Myers as well, Dr. Jeff Myers,
Mm-hmm.
and they all said something that you mentioned as well: the incredible increase that every year is more of the number of kids who were raised in the church, and once they hit that adult years, the 18 years, they go away.
Mm-hmm.
So that has an impact, of course, on everything
Mm-hmm.
concerning their faith. Tell me a little bit about what you found out as you were researching this very topic, sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
and the correlation with this research data that we have today.
Mm-hmm. So the research data on that is kind of traditionally called the youth exodus. It's how many youth are leaving the church. One of the things that I'm more interested in that we address in the first book is not just the number of youth that are leaving the church, but the ones who stay, what do they actually believe? And the ones who stay, what they actually believe is, oh my gosh, I mean, it's in the, we have all the statistics in the book about the percentage of them who do not believe Jesus to be the Son of God, or who do not believe that the resurrection is a literal thing. I think it was like over a third do not believe the Bible to be trustworthy, or they think that Jesus, the Bible is just one of many sources that they can use to learn about Jesus. And so what they're actually believing would not even be considered Orthodox Christianity. And so we have not done a good enough job just really passing on the basic tenets of the faith, at least not in a way to where they are convinced that these facts are actually true. Now, there's a very big difference between teaching what and teaching why. So that we can teach what we believe, but we have not taught why. And I think when we go into the second book, which is a sexuality, one of the things the church has done is it's taught the youth, it's just taught the congregation what a biblical sexuality is, but we have not explained why that God designed it for that way. And so, I mean, in a lot of people's heads, it's just this arbitrary decision that God just decided, hey, let's put the male and female together and let's like not make it except for, in marriage. And this is, just the bonus of being married. And it's so much more theologically rich than that. So just that would be one of the big things, is understanding the why behind the what.
Yes, and I say that the hardest transition for me as a mom, as a Christian mom, was when my kids are transitioning from teenage years to adulthood and are going
Mm-hmm.
into college and are facing all these things that we are talking about. And it was like when my first one, when she went to college, there was a season that a lot of, and it was right when all of these things were going on during COVID, and the sexuality
Yeah.
war that started in our culture, and that you could feel that pull, right? That gravity towards the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you this: how do we deconstruct these agendas and these
Mhm.
arguments without demolishing and diminishing people? Because this is the one thing that this generation does. The Generation Z, they want love above everything, right? So
Yes.
tell me, how do you in your book suggest that?
So first off, we just need to recognize where we are to begin with. So there's a phrase in the book Rules for Radicals where it's talking about how to shove through an agenda. And one of the things that they say is you have to do what you can with what you have, and you clothe it in moral garments, because all effective means require the passport of morality. So what they're saying there is that they're not going towards what's moral, they're not going towards what's good, they're not going towards what's true. They're doing whatever it is that they want to do, but you have to clothe it in moral garments, making people think this is the good, this is the true, this is the beautiful. And so many of our, well, I'll just say like kids always expect evil and sin to present itself as evil and sin. They think of all the TV shows, the Batman and the Spider-Man and the Harry Potter and all the things where you have this epic battle, Lord of the Rings, epic battle between good and evil, and good is easy to spot and evil is easy to spot. But what they don't realize is that a lot of times evil has been clothed. They know the whole, wolf in sheep's clothing, but they haven't been taught how to spot that. And so we first off need to recognize that if we kind of trace the history of ideas, what we are seeing currently is the unmaking of mankind. And so you have a lot of people within the sexual realm that are basically just almost deconstructed humans that you can't deconstruct what it means to be human without an intense amount of anxiety, an intense amount of depression, lots of mental illness, because you are literally breaking down the fabric of what makes us human. So what we have is a population who are very much hurting, and they are grasping at anything that they think will make them whole. And so a lot of times I think Christians will treat anyone who is, I'll just call it sexual rebellion, just that they treat it as someone who just loves sin, instead of this is a person who is so desperate that they've co-opted this ideology to become their identity. And we have to be able to separate those two. In the book, I talk about something called spiritual Stockholm syndrome. That Stockholm syndrome itself is when you have someone who's been taken captive, and the person who captivated them or captured them or kidnapped them or whatever starts to form this bond with them that's kind of an unnatural kind of bond to make them feel like, oh, this is the right place for you to be. So we're not just dealing, sometimes we're dealing with rebels, yes, but a lot of times we're dealing with captives. And not only are we dealing with captives, we're dealing with captives who think that the thing that has captured them cares about them and is for their flourishing and is for their good. And so being able to separate them from this ideology, separate the captive from the ideology is absolutely imperative. And that a lot of times that can only happen through relationship, where you have earned the right to speak into their life, that you have made yourself known as a person who's objective and as a person who loves them, as a person who wants the best for them, and then can maybe show them different ways that, hey, this is not for your best. One of the things that I discovered after we had finished this book actually was a lot of people, when it comes to the sexual realm, they think, oh, the reason why we have so many mental illnesses and high suicide rates among people who identify as LGBT is because that we're in a culture that doesn't accept them. So I said, okay, let's test that hypothesis. So I literally just Googled the most LGBT affirming country in the world. And I'm trying to remember now, it was a little while ago that I did this. It was one of the Nordic countries. And so I looked at the statistics of suicide among those. And what they had is they divided it into 4 groups. They had people who were heterosexual identified, but not sexually practicing, people who were LGBT identified, but not sexually practicing, people who were heterosexual identified and sexually practicing, and people who were LGBT identified and sexually practicing. And what you found is with each group, the suicide rate went up. So it's like if you start at the baseline with the heterosexual, no sexual activity especially for youth, they labeled that a 1. And so that's the baseline. We're going to measure everything else against that. Just identifying without even practicing sexuality, I think like I had a 2.7 increase times rate of suicide. And then you go, interestingly enough, to unmarried youth, heterosexual identified, and sexually practicing, and that rate of suicide actually goes up as well. So this isn't just an LGBT problem. This is anytime we're using sexuality outside of what God has designated for marriage. And I think that one maybe went up to 3.6, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly. And then you go over to the LGBT identified and sexually practicing, and it's like off the charts for the amount of suicidality in there. So it's like we're almost seeing this response to misusing God's sexuality. And if someone wants to say, hey, encouraging a person to not only identify as LGBT and to practice LGBT, if they think that's for their flourishing, they need to look at some of these other statistics that are done in countries that are very, very affirming. I like to compare the ideology. There's this type of tree that it has something called strangler vines. You see this like sometimes in South America, where it's these big vines that will wrap around a tree. And what they do is they're actually parasites that are like getting all the nourishment from the tree, and you leave it there long enough, and what you have is this vine, this hollow vine encrusted thing that is in the shape of a tree.
The tree.
But it's actually just dissolved that tree from the outside in. I think that's what these ideologies are doing, that they are creating people that are hollow versions of themselves. And what person would be able to look at this and say, if this is what's happening with this ideology and it's creating just almost like this hollowness of a human person, why are we fighting to include that kind of diversity? Who would say it's loving to encourage that strangler vine to be around that tree? Who would fight for the right for that strangler vine to be around a tree and be eating it from the outside in? And if we can get youth to understand that this is what is happening, we can maybe help them know this is not the loving thing to do, to be encouraging this, to be affirming it, to just be playing along sometimes with a delusion, like when it comes to the transgender issue, saying, I was born male, but I'm actually female, or female and I'm actually a male. That actually having someone who resists calling things like it is, it's called creating a social reality. When someone creates a social reality, that's how they get rid of the cognitive dissonance in their heads, and they can say this is a true thing. But as long as they have that one voice that's saying this is not true, it will hold them up every time.
Absolutely.
And so I mean, there's so much that goes on into this, so much psychology, but again, it comes down to having that personal relationship. Just like with the captor situation, you have to treat the person and love them so that they know that your love for them is actually greater than the love that maybe the acceptance they're getting from this ideology.
Oh, it's Jesus' way, right? I mean, if you see throughout the Gospels, he loved the sinners. He called so many of them to follow them, but he never told them to come them and stay as they were, right? And so that's the same thing. Yes, and one thing I love about Gen Z is that they are, seeking to love.
They're so compassionate.
And it's just, they're so compassionate. They are much more compassionate than my generation, I believe.
Yeah.
And but then it's another tool that the devil has been using, right, in this generation, to be accepting of things that are destructive, as you were talking about. And we're not even talking we haven't even talked about the Bible when we're talking. You're talking about literally psychology, literally neurology, biology. Is like it does not work without causing havoc in the human brain. And it is proven to be true. Well, one of the things that we see that is being used to advance this ideology a lot, Hillary, is the words, like right, just changing words. Tell me, how do you approach this in the book to explain how important this issue is?
Yeah. And so this is one of the things I encourage a lot of parents to have a buzzwords board somewhere in your house. And whenever you see a word, everybody goes back to the Princess Bride, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
That's my daughter's favorite book. She watches it all the
time. And just identifying sometimes when they're using words in an unbiblical way, like the word love or flourishing. Like one of the things that you'll hear about is harm and flourishing. And we have to remember that we were created with a purpose, and we cannot flourish outside of that purpose. Like we can't do what we weren't created for. We cannot flourish in what we weren't created for. So in words like harm, what's causing harm? So in one of my PowerPoints, I have pictures of harm reducing dispensers, where these are actual dispensers that dispense like hypodermic needles up in the Northwest, so that people who are addicted to drugs can have less harm on them in their drug use, because these aren't tainted needles. And like, is this really causing less harm? So let's look at how we're looking at harm. How are we looking at flourishing? How we're looking at even the concept of bullying. Like, there was a man in Canada who several years back was I can't remember if he was running against, or he was just advocating for someone running against a person who was a transgender woman, but he referred to this transgender woman as a biological man in his info, in his pamphlet or whatever he was passing out. He was fined $40,000 just for saying that this was a biological man, because of the harm and mental trauma and that this inflicted on someone. That we do need to recognize that at some point, being able to even just say what's true is going to be considered harmful, and we need to be preparing our kids for what was called evil is now called good, and what was good is now called evil. And just be able to recognize when a word is kind of smuggling in a concept that they may not agree with. Because we are born with the imago Dei, meaning that the law of God is written on our hearts. We have this instinct as humans that love is good and hate is bad, and that tolerance is good and intolerance is bad, and justice is good and injustice is bad, because these are characteristics of God. But yet, when we now start identifying sin under the banner of injustice, or speaking truth under the banner of oppression, we need to ask them to find what is being oppressive, what is oppressing, what does it mean to be oppressed? All these different kinds of words have these ideological assumptions that are smuggled into them. Like, to say anything that limits one's freedom of expression at all is oppressive. Well, I mean, goodness, I've gotten a ticket before for not wearing my seatbelt. They definitely told me what I could do with my body.
Exactly.
And it's like this idea that, oh, we can't legislate morality. Like, all laws legislate morality. Oh, you can't infringe upon my personal autonomy. All laws infringe upon your personal autonomy.
Yes.
That's the nature of laws. And so it's like we're trying to pick which laws we don't want to infringe upon autonomy and morality. So, but what it's saying is, it's saying that this is not an immoral thing. And people have relegated immorality into the framework of that's your opinion, instead of this is actually true. And so preparing our kids for how the world is presenting this, I think, is the number one thing that we can do, because otherwise there's a verse in Proverbs where it says the first man to make his case sounds right until someone comes and makes a defense. So what we need to be doing is preparing them for the defense that someone else is going to be making against the Christian faith. We think just raising them up in the Christian faith is enough. And this is, the Christian, it can sound really good. It can sound really right until someone else comes along and says something else. And now all of a sudden, mom and dad didn't prepare me for this. Mom and dad apparently don't even know about this. And so I need to consider this. I need to rewrite my worldview, because this was never presented to me before. And so we need to be presenting the lies that are out there so that they are prepared to react and respond accordingly to them as lies, and help them reason through why these are lies.
And I love what you just, this is a very important issue that goes on. Even in the strongest Christian households, we are from a generation that did not grow up with this problem. I mean, that's just the truth. We did not. I mean, I wasn't a Christian. I was 25 years old, and I didn't face this problems, even or this confusion, even though I wasn't even in the church. There was not such thing. So we are not equipped naturally to deal with this with our children. And so if you don't equip yourself with knowledge of what's truly going on, and how we can address and not lose our being the salt and light, but yet not lose the love side of the gospel. One thing that I just discussed with another one of my guest not long ago was about the fact that like we tend to focus on the loving Jesus
Mhm.
of the Gospels, but we forget that he is also the lion,
Mhm.
that's coming to judge the world, judge sin.
Yes.
And he, and even throughout his walk on earth, he was very harsh towards sin. There was no such thing as, just patting you on the back because, as long as you're happy, it's, and I saw this quote from the Chosen,
Mhm.
the TV series, Mary Magdalene. She said, somebody addressed her about something, and she said, I was called to follow him, not the other way around.
Yeah.
you know and it's that's exactly right, and we have to be equipped, and this book is an incredible resource for parents out there. Mamas, yes, but I believe parents, both a
Yeah.
mom and dad should read it, discuss it, because it will give you very practical ideas on how to address the questions your children have, or maybe they don't even come with those questions to
Mhm.
you, but they are facing these contradictions to their faith everywhere they go.
Yeah.
And
I advocate in there that I can't remember if it's in the book or if it's just something I talk about, but how we need to be the ones that are bringing up these issues first, because everybody says, well, I don't want to mess with my child's innocence and stuff, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't think we have that option
I
nowadays
don't
unless you have
agree.
them like locked in your basement. But this one phenomena, and I don't know what it's called. I've kind of started calling it the founder's effect, so that's not an official word, it's just what I use for it. That the person who's the first to introduce you to a topic becomes the expert in your mind. And I've
Mm.
seen this in my own life where even with science and biology, I have my master's in biology, but I remember the professors before I was ever, like 10 years before I was even in a program, that started making these comments in biology that really got me thinking. And to this day, I still, like, if I have a question, that's who I go back to see what they've said, because they were the first ones to introduce the topic to me. And so this is why I think it's really important for parents to be the first ones to introduce this topic to their kids. And it doesn't have to be like you sit them down and like, let's talk about homosexuality, like
Yes.
it's like, because that's too much for some kids, but you take cues from the culture, figure out what they're noticing. Like Amy, the contributor Amy, she notices when her oldest is picking up on something, but her youngest isn't. And then there's times when one of the younger kids picks up on something and the older one doesn't. And so she takes that time of, okay, let's address this right now. Or you ask them, what do your friends say about XYZ? Because sometimes depersonalizing it, saying, oh, well, these aren't my questions, it's just something I heard someone else ask, can be a little bit less embarrassing for them. And so find out, what are your friends saying about this? What have you heard about this? And if they really don't want to talk about it, you can say, okay, will you just make a promise to me that if people start bringing this up, before you try to give them an answer, that you would bring it back to me so that we can talk about it. That shows I'm aware of what's going on. I know the names of all the different categories of things that are going on, that I have studied this before. The Bible has something to say about this. And I am a safe place for questions, because as our friend Katie Faust says, she needs, I'm trying to remember the phrase she used, but basically you need to be shock proof. Like you can't have any kind of reaction in your face. Like they ask something, you're like, oh my gosh, and you get in a frenzy. Your kids then know, don't go to mom, she freaks out when I talk about this. But just to have
Right.
this like stoic face of like, well, okay, that's a good issue, let's
That's
talk about
exactly
it.
right.
And you need
Yes,
to practice this with people,
you
like be like,
do.
okay, practice being my kid and asking me like the worst possible embarrassing question. Okay, I'm going to practice keeping my faith completely shock proof.
Yes.
Yeah, so and then this is how we are going to be able to address it with our kids.
Absolutely. And I echo your words and belief, because that's how I raised my kids. I was the one who went to them and I talked about hard things and I asked hard questions that sometimes were embarrassing or whatever, to
Mm-hmm.
address certain issues before anybody else did. And it was you have to be intentional
Mm-hmm.
more than ever these days. It's crazy. I had to
Mm-hmm.
talk about sex with my first daughter when she was 9 years old.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about anything until I was 12, and Catholic nuns were teaching me in my
Well, that must have
school.
been fun.
That was something.
Yeah.
So but then my mom, when I asked her a question, she had my older sister, who was 9 years older than me, come
Mm-hmm.
and talk to me about it. She was only like, not 10,
She didn't
20 years old, not even
she didn't know
that.
much more than you
She didn't know.
did.
So we need to be the ones. You are right. We need to be that first reference to them. And there are also so many great resources out there, which I use. I don't remember the name of the book, but to talk to your kid just
Mhm.
about the basic sexuality, even when they're very young.
Yeah.
So, and we need to, because that's another thing you address in the book, Hillary. You talk about how soon kids are being introduced to all of this agenda. Can you
Yep.
tell us a little bit about what you found out?
Oh my gosh. So the average exposure, not just of porn, but of hardcore porn for boys is 8 years old. So all these people who think that they're going to wait till 12 and 13 to talk to their boys about this, I recommend the book Good Pictures, Bad Pictures from when the time your kids are 5 or able to really distinguish, hey, something makes me uncomfortable. So that is one of the things I think. Secondly, we live, unfortunately, in a culture where there's a lot more sexual abuse and permissions being taken. And so one of the things I also advocate for is using actual body terms. So I'll give you an example from a friend of mine who it's a friend of a friend who was a teacher, and she had this little girl that was always saying, my uncle touched my cookies. And she was thinking, well, she made cookies and the uncle's taking them. She's like, oh, until she had a parent teacher conference and the little girl was sitting in such a way, and the mom goes, cover your cookies. And the little girl covers herself. And all of a sudden the teacher
Wow.
goes, oh my gosh. Um, that's what this child was trying to tell me. So using the appropriate body language, and of course, I will say, someone saying so and so touched my bottom is very different in the trigger warning. I'm going to say very biological term. So and so touched my anus. That's very different. And it's like, because
Yes.
there was this kid that was in, I think, one of the books that I read, there was this kid that was in one of those like McDonald's or whatever, the things that you crawl through on playgrounds,
Yeah.
where
Mhm.
this kid was literally sticking his hand and his finger up inside the child, and all the child could keep saying was so and so was touching my bottom. And it's like, everybody touches everybody's bottom when you're in one of those things where you're crawling, nose to butt through those. That's
Wow.
like one of those things sometimes you can't get around. But if he had had the language to say so and so was touching my anus, that would have alerted the mom to, hey, something big is going on. So I think that's just or we were talking about age. This is how young, these are some of the ways that we can prepare them when they're really young to be
Mm-hmm.
able to be talking about things in a helpful way, just um, identifying the body parts, and then identifying, hey, they need to know how to react when they see pictures that make them uncomfortable. As I said, that you've got good pictures, bad pictures, and you've got good pictures, bad pictures, junior. So I recommend everybody going through those books with their kids so that their kids will have the language to talk about this with them when the time is coming, if something is happening. Like for the little girl, if her uncle is touching her cookies, she needs to be able to voice that to the parent.
That's great. Wow, some of the things that you said I never thought about. Because I use some of those cuter names to talk about parts with my kids, but I
Mm-hmm.
never thought about it. It's very important. It's very, very true. If
Mm-hmm.
you have to call it what it is so that they can address it, especially when they are young.
Yeah, and you got to
And
be prepared that they're going to scream this out in the middle of Costco.
yeah.
Like that's why a lot of times people don't want to tell their kids. Because I remember when I was in high school, there was some girls that they liked what was called the penis game, where it's like every person says it a little bit louder than the next, like in a crowded place, like a restaurant. So stuff like that's going to happen. But the kind of protection that you're giving your kids by teaching them these words is still going to outweigh the embarrassment. And just every time your kid embarrasses you, just be like, you know what? This means that my kid will know how to tell me if someone's acting inappropriately, even though we're in the middle of Target and this is super embarrassing. This means my child knows what this is and can speak appropriately, and just kind of, this too shall pass.
Yes. Everybody will get over it for sure.
Everybody will get over it. Yeah,
It'll
exactly.
be forgotten. Somebody
Mhm.
else is gonna, shout something worse. In
Yeah,
a
there might
minute.
be some mom out there that's like, you taught your kids the right words.
Or if somebody addresses you, then you say, then you need to start addressing everybody who's using the F word, every other, word that they use, because that is much more inappropriate to,
Yes.
to be used. And now it seems like it's just like breathing now,
Yeah.
to use some of those words. Well, Hillary, what a great interview, and I love the information. I just want you to talk to someone who's listening to this, and they say, "Wow, this is exactly what I needed. This is what I need to equip myself. I am right there. I'm having issues with my teenager child or my adult child, or transitioning to adulthood, or maybe even grandparents who are like, they're realizing that their children are not equipped
Mhm.
to help their grandchildren to understand biblical sexuality, um, how God sees our gender, and everything else. Tell us, to that person who is interested in the book, what are they to expect inside this book? What kind of practical information that they will find? Just tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so I would say it's divided into three sections. So the first section is titled "Things You Probably Knew but Also Forgot," and we're going through not only the what behind the Christian view of sexuality and the biblical view of sexuality, but the why. I think a lot of times people stop at this idea of, well, it's just for a husband and wife only. Well, why is it for a husband and wife only? Do you understand what the theological significance is of that act? And what it is it's a covenant renewal ceremony. The covenant that you made on your wedding day is being renewed every time a couple makes love. And if we can think about it and teach our kids to understand maybe this category of physical things that reflect a spiritual reality. Now, some examples of covenant would be when God puts a rainbow in the sky, God doesn't have to say every single time, I'm never going to flood the earth again to kill everything on it. He has the rainbow in the sky. And every time you see the rainbow, you can be reminded, oh, yeah, God promised this. Same thing with the covenant of circumcision. It's that every time someone saw, hey, this person's circumcised, back in the time of early Judaism, that meant this is a people who have covenanted with God. And same thing, sexuality, and just the act of sex is a physical representation of a covenant promise. And so I think this is something we can address with kids who are really young by making little covenant promises like, I'm never going to lie to you, or I'm always going to love you forever, and having some handshake that you do so they start to understand there can be physical actions that reinforce a promise that was already made.
Mm.
So step one is really understanding what is sex to begin with, and really understanding for ourselves. I've had so many moms read this book that say, I wish I had understood sex like this when I was dating, when I was young. And some of them
Right.
say, this has actually helped my sex life in my marriage.
Wow.
So we really go through the basics of that. And then in chapter 4, we talk about emotional reasoning versus logical reasoning, and basically how do we separate the concept of the captor and the captive. How do we separate people from ideologies? The second part in the book is called "My Kids Are Being Taught What," and so we really address what is going on in the schools, what the schools are actually teaching, and maybe some of the cartoons. And then we have an actual curriculum, excuse me, that is used all over, called the genderbread person. And some people have it as the gender unicorn. I've heard it as the gender hippopotamus, the gender, whatever you want to put in there. It's the same information. So it kind of teaches you how to break that down. And then it goes into kind of the undergirding philosophy that's made all this possible, which is sex
Yeah.
positivity.
Yep.
And in the final section, things that are tripping everybody up, we go into the kind of the real specific things like pornography, same-sex attraction, gender identity, and purity culture, where purity culture is something that Amy did a lot of research on this. I mean, she checked out all the books from Southwestern Baptist, just this,
Wow.
big old pile of books on sex. The librarian was giving her the side eye. But looking at what we had, and so we called that one, when the church's best efforts went kablooey. So it's what we tried to do, but these are some unfortunate messages that we stirred in with a biblical message. So knowing why people are so hurt, some people are so legitimately hurt from purity culture.
Mhm.
Um, and then we end it with, what it looks like to take up your sexual cross. And then my favorite section, the very end, it's things to say to your kids until they want to gag. And that's getting little bite-sized pieces of philosophy that you just repeat over and over again until they can say it in their minds. And you can say, when my kid finishes my sentence and when they roll their eyes, I have done my job well.
I love that. I love that. I'm all for, I love great books on theoretical approaches of subjects, but nothing is better than a book that not only gives you a ton of information about a subject, but also practical ways that the reader can literally, finish the chapter and put it in practice in their family. And I believe
Yep.
that Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality certainly fits that bill, and I love to promote it. Hillary, I will write a column for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about it, and we'll be very, very excited to share this with my audience too. And everybody listening, listen, Hillary was kind enough to give me an extra copy of the book. So if you fill out the form at the end, in the show notes or at the end of my blog, you are going to be able to enter for a contest to get a copy of this beautiful book, or go get it. Don't wait, go get it. It's great.
And I also
Well,
want to encourage everybody that Amazon has done their best to hide the fact that there's a study guide that goes along with it. Every person I talk to has no idea that this exists.
oh,
And I've gone
wow.
on Amazon to the different books trying to see what other books do they recommend, and they never recommend this book. So look for the Mama
Wow.
Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality, and we called it the Discipleship Workbook because we added a lot of really practical activities that you can do. But I feel like every time now that I'm aware of the problem, every time I give an interview, I want to point people towards that. So if you want to do this book
Absolutely.
in a group and have things you can do with your kids, it's an excellent, excellent resource.
Excellent. What a great the resource for like MOPS, at the churches and
Mhm.
different women groups that want to study a little bit more on the study, the subject, and Bible studies, of course. I love that. Well, Hillary, thank you so much for this time together. It was a blessing to get to know a little bit more about you and your beautiful work, you and Amy's. God bless you. I'm telling you, I know I can only imagine the heat that you're probably getting from everywhere.
And the spam that now comes to our emails.
Oh, oh my goodness.
Amy and I send each other pictures of like, hey, check out this email I just got. We've ruined our browser history forever. Our editor had to like alert the tech part of the publisher, be like, you need to be aware I'm going to be looking up some weird stuff on my work computer.
Wow, I didn't think about that, but absolutely.
We really took
Well,
it for the team. I'll let you know that.
well, I'm sure it was worth every minute. So
Absolutely.
I love it. By the way, I didn't tell the audience, but the subtitle is Empowering Your Kids to Understand and Live Out God's Design. So that's what everything that we talked about. It's beautiful. Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you too.
Thank you.